Hey there, it's Christian from 7 Gaming Network, and I'm here with another Star Wars Destiny Tactica. And this one's going to be on, well, a completely legendary character in both senses of the word. It's the legendary Luke Skywalker. So, I'm going to go through the die sides on the card. We're going to have a look at his ability. We're going to think about his points, take into account what his role is in your team, and what decks are we seeing him in, as well as having a little look at a couple of tricks that we can do, certainly when we're playing against Luke. Okay, so let's have a look at these dice then. Now, he's got two big damage sides. We can see that right from the off. So he's got a 2 melee and a 3 melee, straight up melee. Now, those are big damage sides. They are big enough for us to actually build around. When you've got a character in Star Wars Destiny that's able to bring such consistently big damage just through their character dice alone, that's really big, and so therefore that's the kind of character that you can build a whole deck around, and that's certainly what Luke Skywalker is. I think it totally makes it's totally fine here, and it's also good to point out that he is very, very similar, of course, to Darth Vader. Again, great design. It's lovely how they've done that. That there's a real echoing of Vader's die and his abilities in Luke and his die and ability in this game. So, and I think that just as we can build a whole deck around Vader because he's such a powerful die, Luke is no different. So these two big damage sides, they're the fundamental element of this die, of this character, and why you're playing with him. He really is here to bring damage to the table. Now, it's you might say, hang on, it's only 2 of the 6 sides are actually damage, and that's true. We see quite a lot of characters in this game will have 3 sides of damage. Most usually, apart from someone like Padawan or Grievous, normally the 3rd side will require like a resource, or it'll be something not so consistently reliable, somebody like Kylo. So we've only got the 2 damage sides here, but they're both big and they're both reliable. Now, let's have a quick look at these other sides before we move on. We've got a focus side. We always like focus. What I will say is, on a character like Luke, if we've got, because he has a lot of points, and we'll talk a little bit more about his points, but what we've got to be careful of, in a sense, what we need to be doing is assessing what these other die faces are like in the light of the fact that he does actually cost quite a lot of points. So it's 15 points for his 1 die side and 20 for his 2 dice version. Now, if you then are running just the 1 die version and you roll that focus, that's a lot of points for a focus die. And what I'm sort of, I guess, trying to point out here is that these other sides, including, which is 1 shield and then a 1 resource, they're not really all that marvellous. They're not really very exciting. They're not going to impact the game in a big way. Not like those 2 and 3 melee damage sides. So what I'm trying to say here is that whilst the focus is always useful, you don't, especially if you're playing the 1 die version, you're not excited about seeing that, because of course then you're essentially using it maybe on one of his upgrade dice that you've got with him, or on another character. And we've already talked about the fact that Luke is normally the centerpiece of your team. So the focus is fine, but again, we're not really going to use it. If that had been something like a 2 disrupt or a discard, that would have been more powerful. That would have been better, because that really feels like you may well resolve that. The 1 focus side on Luke, it's it's just not ideal. You don't really want to see that, and you don't want to be resolving it, because on these dice you need the 2 or the 3 resolving. That's maybe where there is something a little bit different to Vader, in the fact that he's also got a 2 and a 3, and he's got a 2 disrupt side, which is, you know, a third very powerful die face. What we're looking at here now is Luke's next one, the 1 shield. You don't want to be resolving a 15-point dice for a 15-point die for a shield. That's really, if you're doing that, you're doing it wrong. I mean, we really don't want to be using up such expensive dice for such straightforward results. And then the resource, and then a blank. So we can see that the 2 and a 3, it's super strong, it's really powerful, it's why we're using Luke, all those kind of things. But what we don't really see is another die side that we're pleased about. And that's really difficult when we're taking into account the fact that Luke is 15 and 20 points. Now, if you go with the 20-point version, the 2 dice, you increase your odds so much more of getting 2 or 3 damage, and it's absolutely feasible to be rolling 4, 5 or even 6 damage. Really, really great. And what I'm feeling is that if you're going to use Luke, a single dice version doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like quite enough value for the 15 points. Now, admittedly, because it's a 15 points, there is the potential for quite a lot to go with him, and then that 1 focus doesn't seem so bad, because that focus could be focusing maybe another powerful character that's going to come into the game in the months and years to come for 15 points. But right now, I think if you're going to use Luke, really it needs to be the 2 dice version, so that you can get those 2s and 3s off more frequently and really get value out of his dice. So let's talk about his ability, because it's a big ability. After you activate him, draw a card in a lovely counterbalance to Vader, which is after you activate this character, your opponent must discard a card. Okay, so let's talk about good things with that then. Well, it gives us options. We discard cards for rerolls. We've already talked about the fact that out of Luke's dice we want to be getting the 2 and the 3, so we're going to be quite focused and deliberate about the results we want out of our dice, and so we may need to do the odd extra discard to try and force that 2 or 3 damage through on a more frequent basis. And so therefore, having that inbuilt ability to give us those options, that's a really nice aspect of Luke's 15 and 20 points. It also, of course, allows us to find upgrades more quickly. And that's, I think, another way we're going to get the most out of Luke. When you've got a character who is able to put out 2 or 3 dice off, 2 or 3 melee damage off 1 die, if we're playing the 2 die version, and then 2 dice version, and then we end up getting, you know, his lightsaber on, or a lightsaber, or you know, one with the Force, or, you know, these other big upgrades on there. It really becomes terrifying when Luke activates. And of course, finding those, getting extra cards, if it's giving us those upgrades that we need, that we can then be ramping up and keeping the pressure on and making this character the real sort of damage beat stick that we want him to be. And the other thing, of course, is that it's helping us to find our killer events, which kind of leads me into really decks that we see Luke currently being used in. Now, if you look on Star Wars Destiny DB, in terms of, we're in the Awakening set as of now, there's only one deck list that we see Luke being used in, and it's actually the 3rd most popular on there, and it's the Luke Akbar combination. And one thing we see that is really strong about that is the fact that Akbar, of course, has his 2 focus side. Now, why I've moved on to this after mentioning events and drawing into your events Luke's ability is the interaction and the sort of combination that we see around all in. So when we manage to get our focus result on Admiral Akbar, if we can then all in, then before the opponent can do anything about it, we can use our 2 focus side on Admiral Akbar, turn our 2 Luke dice to their 3 melee damage side, and then resolve 6 melee damage all in one go. So, and that's a phenomenally powerful play. All in costs 1 resource. So all we need to do is have 1 resource on that card available to make a 6 damage play open up on the table. And of course, if Luke's got a lightsaber on or something like that, then we can resolve all the melee damage at once. We really could be looking at an 8 or a 9 damage going off that our opponent can't do anything about. So Luke's combination with Akbar is really powerful for that reason, because that play becomes available. Yes, it's split damage, but then hey, we're not looking at Akbar doing any sort of damage. He's there to support and enable Luke to do his thing. So after that, there isn't really a lot else that we see Luke being paired with at the moment, because he's just slightly awkward in the points values, in the colour pie, and in the characters that can go with him. One thing's for sure though, as the game progresses and we see more and more characters coming out, we really will find that Luke is, I think, going to become more and more powerful. It's just early on, it just don't quite have really many options other than Akbar to pair him with and get best value out of him. As we get more characters coming through, as we get maybe a 7 point blue characters that could go with him, maybe for a nice sort of mono blue hero, could be really interesting. But until there is more, I think at the moment Luke is he's a little bit one-dimensional in terms of who you can pair him with and who's going to work alongside, because Akbar is probably the only one, although Akbar is an excellent one to pair him with. So definitely have a look into that, because he's it's a really strong deck and you can have a lot of fun with it. So in terms of playing against Luke, well, like most big character die decks, they're very, very vulnerable to single die removal cards. So if you've got cards like Isolation or He Doesn't Like You, those type of cards can really put a spanner in the works of a player who's running Luke, because they're, in a sense, it's eggs in one basket type situation. They've got a lot of their damage is coming out of those 1 or 2 character dice. So if you can get rid of any of them, and you can get rid of them fairly cheaply, let's face it, an Isolation or a He Doesn't Like You, those are pretty easy cards to play. You're neutering a huge portion of the damage that deck's going to be able to do. He's also, I think, quite vulnerable to single die manipulation. So things like the Night Sister ability, or if you can, if you make them, if you can re-roll Luke's die, then you're probably looking good. And that's simply because Luke's die has really only got those 2 good sides. So you probably don't mind if he rolls his 2 and a 3 and you've got 5 damage coming at you. If you can get him to re-roll those 2, well, 4 of the 6 sides on each of those dice, you're probably really not that fussed about him rolling. You obviously don't mind him rolling a blank or a resource or a shield, or a focus is not quite so ideal. But what's he going to do? Focuses at the Luke die to 3 melee damage. Well, okay, you just change it from 5. That's still a big difference. So and I think you run the odds on that. So it seems to me that if you can just either get that single die removal, or you can get a bit of manipulation going on, you're going to really cause a Luke player some problems. Anyway, so there's Luke. a much loved character, a wonderful and great character from the Star Wars universe. I think they've implemented him pretty well here. He's got a great ability. He's got some really strong melee damage output. It's just a shame his supporting dice sides are a little bit weaker and can end up with that feeling of, oh, I didn't have a very exciting turn there with my 20.2 dice version of Luke Skywalker. That can happen. But it does mean that he becomes a little easier to control and to play against if you've got some of those dice manipulation or dice removal abilities, which are always important in Star Wars Destiny, of course. So there's Luke. As always, if you think I've missed anything or made some glaring errors, then please do say in the comments, because we want players who are coming to these videos watching and learning and being able to get in and enjoy this amazing game of Star Wars Destiny. So until next time, keep playing and enjoying Star Wars Destiny.